Welcome to the Raise Your Game podcast, presented by 226 Sports. I'm Jess Schmittling.
And I'm Alexa Potts.
And today we are talking all things hitting. So we are going to spend some time diving into just Alexa's different philosophies around hitting, just some absolutes, and then what the experience would be like inside of the cage with her. So we're going to get started here. Just kind of give us an overview of just generalize your hitting philosophy.
Yeah, I had to think a little bit about this because it's hard to simplify, but I think I simplified it into three main pieces. One, master the absolutes. Two, maximize your swing. And three, make it happen. So when I think about mastering the absolutes, I'll share a little bit on those in a second, but there's some things that everybody has to have in their swing, and so I think that's the first priority. Those are some key pieces to the swing, and so we're going to make sure that every athlete that I see, that I'm going to attack those things. And then the second thing is maximize your swing. So how can we elevate you once we have kind of the absolutes? How can we elevate you to the next level? How can we increase your bat speed? How can we make some tweaks and things to maybe your style to help you perform better? And then finally make it happen, which that's more on the execution side. So it's one thing to hit well in the cage, right? But it's another thing to be able to translate that to the game. So really making sure that athletes know how to compete in the box, know how to win the battle in the box. And I think that's an important piece of training that really I think separates me as a trainer. Is it's yes, we have to make sure that we get the technique down, but then I think it's how can we make sure that athletes compete their best in the field. And sometimes that's a lot of times that's completely independent of the technique side. It's a lot of the mentality and how to make sure that you are in the right frame of mind to be able to perform your best. So
all right, well, we're really going to dive into all of that. So I know you talk a lot about, even just with the athletes, of getting them to understand when it's a style versus an absolute.
Yeah.
So as you were talking through, as your just overview, the absolutes came up, of course. And so what would you say those absolutes are for you?
I think probably I'm going to stick to three today. Three main absolutes. One, the load, which is how we, that's pre-swing, right? How we work our body to get into a position to hit. And so that's all about creating momentum and really it affects two things. One, timing. So if you don't have a load, if you go from nothing to try to go 100% at a swing, a lot of kids struggle with their timing. They're very inconsistent. And then power. It does affect power, but I think it affects timing probably more than people maybe think. And then I think secondly is the launch position. So this is the position after the load. I call it the point of decision. So a common flaw that I see in hitters is we load and then we go straight to our swing. And so we have to have a point where we're kind of back to neutral, if you will, and it's where we're saying, I'm swinging or I'm not. Mm-hmm. It's your point of decision, and I think when we don't have that, when we go from low to swing, one, we're susceptible to change-ups, off-speed, when we get a little bit older, and that's a more prominent pitch. And then two, we're just out of control, right? We have really no adjustability when we get to that point because I've already kind of committed to the pitch. So if I'm maybe second guess myself or I'm like, oh shoot, it's a ball, like it's very hard to check swing when you don't have that launch position. So that would be number two. And then number three would be just our bat path. How is our bat working through the zone? We want to make sure that we're in the zone early. That will help us on faster pitching if we get our barrel in the zone deep in our body. And then we want to make sure that we extend as long as we can, basically through the pitcher is kind of my visual, and that'll help us maybe on a slower pitcher when we're maybe a little bit more out in front of the pitch. So the more my bat is in the zone, I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but I call it the Nike sign, bat path. The more my barrel's in the zone, the more room for error I have on my timing. And the reality is you're not going to be perfect on timing. And so if your barrel's kind of in and out, check mark swing or kind of a U swing, you have to be perfectly on time. Your barrel has to be in the zone at the exact time that the ball is, and it's stressful because every pitch is even slightly different. Even with the same pitcher, it's very unlikely that it's the exact same speed. So I think giving us more room for air by allowing our barrel to be in the zone for as long as possible and not pulling off the ball is really important. So those are my three absolutes: the load, launch, and then our bat path.
For those of you listening versus watching, I think this is going to be really interesting because obviously
got a lot of hand motions.
As we're talking about training, we want to show. So it'll be really interesting. Those of you just listening.
And I think I didn't share a little. I want to share a little on the style part of it before we move on. The style is things like how you stand. Start things like how you grip. Where you hold the bat. Some people choke up. Some people are all the way down on the bat. That's all style. That's all comfortability. And for me, I try to not mess with that first. I try to get to the absolutes. However, if I feel like an athlete's style is impacting their absolute or their ability to effectively go through those absolutes, then I might say, hey, let's maybe tweak this a little bit. So a common one, for example, style is like, where do I hold my hands? I have kind of a preference of style. I just rather keep it, near my back shoulder. I don't prefer kind of the high. Most people don't really go low, but a lot of people, if I see an adjustment, it's very high. I don't love that because I feel like the higher my hands are, the longer it takes to get my bear on the zone. It just adds an extra layer of work that I feel like just isn't needed. To me, simple is better. But I will not change that off the bat unless I feel like it is impacting their ability to get in the zone and they're maybe struggling with faster pitching. They just can't get there. Then I'll say, hey, let's maybe bring those hands down a little bit. So I think it's important that there are both styles and absolutes. I attack the style or the absolutes first. And then if I see an issue of our ability to execute that, then I'll go to the style side. So,
well, let's talk about when we get into the cage. What's a typical hitting lesson or session look like?
I think one, it's going to start out casual. Just understanding where the athlete's at, right? How was their day? Did they have a good day? Did they have a hard day? Trying to kind of get an understanding because, we all have factors, that influence our mood and influence just maybe you don't feel very good. Whatever the case is, I think it's important for me as a trainer to understand, like, where is this athlete coming into the session? And then I think from there, physically, it's going to start most of the time with T. And however, the T is... It's very intentional, right? It's not just, hey, warm up on the tee. I think that's where sometimes we say, hey, like, just go get some cuts off the tee. I think a lot of times, unless I'm with a new athlete where I'm trying to kind of see their swing for the first time, if I'm with a returning athlete that I've been with, it's a very intentional start to kind of get their body loose, but also kind of feel their swing. So I start off with tee. And then pretty quickly I try to get to some sort of movement of the ball. So side toss, front toss, machine, BP. I want to make sure that I'm not spending all my time on the tee. I want to get a moving ball involved. But I think it's important to note that every hitter's session is different. So it's not just a one-size-fits-all. It's not, hey, every kid that I'm going to see this night is going to go through this exact curriculum. It's very unique and specific to the kid and what they need in that moment. So very adjustable. But every session is going to kind of start at casual, understanding where they're at, and then start off on the tee and then kind of work to as game-like as we can towards the end of the session.
Yeah. So that's what people can expect from you going into that training session. What some pieces of advice that you'd give to make it the most successful on their end?
I think probably the biggest one would be just the coming in with the right attitude and approach. This idea of having a desire to learn to hit, not just to hit. And I think sometimes lessons or training can just be, hey, I'm just getting my reps in for today. And yeah, there is a piece of that, of course, but I think it's like we're learning to hit. And so sometimes some of my sessions, depending on the time of year, sometimes there's less reps and there's more dry or more feel. Sometimes it's very heavy reps. And so there's different seasons and different reasons to kind of adjust that. But I think it's important that all hitters come in with this mentality of, I'm going to be uncomfortable today, maybe I'm going to try something new today. I'm really not interested in just like being a bystander to you getting your reps in. I want to make sure that like we're coming to learn. We're open-minded to try new things, and we're engaged, right? We're focused. I like to ask a lot of questions, and it just helps me get to know my hitter better. It's not about, I don't want to be a robot. I don't want to create robots. So my goal in my training is to help educate them and help increase their knowledge of really their swing individually, and understand how to make adjustments, what their issues are in their swing. And so I think that's how questions for me are just a way to understand, like, are they getting it? Do they understand it? Are they confused? And so I think the more open-minded, the more vulnerable, the more honest that athletes are in that time, don't give me the answer that I want to hear, right? Give me truly what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and if you don't understand, I want to know that, because that helps me. Because every kid's different, and so I think a phrase for one kid might work better than that same phrase for a different kid, and so I'll have to understand what kind of clicks in their head. So questions are an important piece for me.
Yeah. So how does training maybe then look like? You kind of hit on a couple things there, but anything more to elaborate of training that maybe looks different than other hitting sessions?
Well, I think probably the biggest piece would be one, we have a physical component to training. Of course, we are hitting, we're working on our swing, but I think the difference is there's a lot of mentality, mindset that we talk about, because again, it's not just about making your swing great. It's about getting you to be able to compete on the field. So I try to balance and make sure I have conversations about, like, yes, let's work on these swing mechanics, but also let's work on how to be a better hitter in the game. And what does that look like? What are strategies? What are mindsets? What are phrases that we can use? How do we adjust in the box? How do we hit different pitches? It's not just about tweaking your mechanics. It's about truly being a better hitter. So I think that's probably the biggest difference of how I approach training.
Yeah, I get to hear a lot of the different cues and things that you give to hitters, because I'm usually doing pitching training right next to you there. You hit on one earlier. You said the Nike sign, and I hear you use that one a lot. What are some common analogies or phrases that you use with kids that seem to really resonate?
Yeah, I love analogies. I think it helps kids really understand. It gives them a visual. I have 5 probably that I wrote down that I use pretty frequently. I'll try to start from the beginning of the swing and work kind of to the end in order. So number 1 is just the idea of a rubber band effect. So most kids have shot a rubber band at someone, or bow and arrow is kind of a similar concept, but the idea is that when we're loading and we're working into our launch position, this is where you need to watch the video, when we're loading and we're working into practicing hitting sitting down, but when we're loading and working into our launch position, what we want to feel, the key is the stretch idea. When I stretch a rubber band, I pull it back and I release it. The stretch is the reason for the explosiveness. Now, if I pull the rubber band back and I let go too early accidentally, it doesn't go anywhere. It just kind of flops to the ground. And so to create the most explosive rubber band to get someone, I have to pull back and fully stretch. It's the same idea when we're loading and we're getting into that point of decision, that launch position, is I want to make sure I'm stretched. So making sure my knob of the bat, the bottom of the bat's to the catcher, that's going to create that stretch to then release, and now I've got a ton of power built up to let go. So that's the first one. The second one would be this idea of a helicopter versus a windmill. And so a common flaw for hitters is that we see very rotational hitters, and so when they go to swing, they just immediately pull out and they swing very flat shouldered, and so we call that like a helicopter. If you think about the blades of a helicopter, it's here in my shoulders. That's a very like rotational swing, and I'm going to have a hard time being consistent if I have that rotational swing. Versus a Ferris wheel works a little more this way. And so the first move is really getting my barrel on plane with the pitch. So you can see my shoulders work this way. Now, some people may say like, hey, you're dropping your hands. I'm not dropping my hands. If I were to do this, that would be dropping my hands. So I think that's important to note that we're not dropping your hands. This is a key move to get my barrel on plane with the pitch, because the pitch is down here and my bat's up here. So I think that move there is the windmill. And that gets my barrel on plane and works my bat in the proper direction. So hitting is a domino effect, and I think, if you immediately go here, you get that flat shoulder, man, it's tough from there. Your bat pass kind of whacked out, you're going to pull off the ball, etc. So it's going to cause a lot of issues there. So that's my second one. My third one is just in regards to where we want to hit the ball. I use the idea of like punching someone. I don't tell people to punch someone, but I say, like, if you were to, right, would you get to the side of them and try to punch them there, or would you kind of wind up and get behind, like, them in front of you and get behind? And of course they're all like, well, yeah, I would like that would make sure that I'm behind
Right.
and I get into that punch. So it's the same thing in hitting. If we let the ball get too deep in our body, the power is to the side, right? My body's to the side, the ball's right here, and I don't have anything, right? Versus if the ball's out in front of me, I've got my power behind the ball. That's where I can really get that ball going out with some sort of force, especially, I mean, you get older, that pitch is coming in, 55, 65 miles an hour. I mean, you got to have that body behind the ball to have any force. So really understanding, like, where should we hit the ball, that's really the key for that one. Towel whip. So a lot of kids understand, if they haven't, they know, like, when you try to whip a towel at someone, you kind of wind up, you get it back here and you whip that towel. So I think understanding, like, we're trying to not, a lot of kids lead with their hands. They're very handsy. I call that push, right? We're pushing to the ball and there's just not a ton of power in that. And so really understanding, like, when I whip a towel at someone, I wind up, I create kind of that whip, that stretch, and then I snap. And I get the end of the towel. That's what gets them, right? I don't push my towel where I'm holding them. I push that at them. That's silly, right? So I think kids understand, like, really that whip concept of whipping that barrel through the zone, not pushing a barrel through the zone is that. And then finally, the Nike sign. The Nike sign really is our path, and so obviously everybody, and I got a Nike sign, I know you're playing this, but I got a Nike sweatshirt on here. So I think this little curl here is that's that first motion I talked about with the windmill, is getting my barrel on plane, and then you can see I get behind the ball and I kind of level off in the middle, and then there's maybe a little bit of a high finish on the end of the Nike sign. So the wrong path would be, some examples would be maybe like an Under Armour, where kids maybe drop those hands and they come up excessively, kind of that U. A check mark, where kids kind of chop down at it here. So again, those are examples of bat pass that your barrel's really only in the zone for maybe 1 or 2 points, versus that Nike sign, it's continuous on that plane of that pitch. So kids love that one because they can visualize it themselves. So yeah, analogies are a great way to just get kids to connect the dots a little bit better, instead of just using your voice and trying to get them to understand it.
I always love the Nike sign whenever you find the one kid, and if you're doing a group lesson or a team lesson, and then they're the one kid that has the Nike somewhere on them, so they're able to connect that dot even more. So when you start thinking about a new athlete that comes in for the first time, where do you usually start with them?
Yeah, this is a good question, because I think that it would be easy to say, hey, I start at this exact point for every kid. But I think where I start usually is I take a look at their swing. I let them swing without any sort of feedback from me. I might ask some questions to understand them as a hitter and see what they understand about themselves as a hitter. It's a great way for me to learn them. But I think I start with where the most opportunity is. So what is their biggest flaw that I see when I watch them swing? And that could be their bat path, that could be their load, right? It's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but when I watch them swing, I'm like, what kind of makes me like, ooh, right? If they could get that, not that that's the end-all be-all,
right,
but if they can clean that up first thing, it's going to drastically improve them. So I try to look at what's the lowest hanging fruit, essentially, and that's kind of where I start with each athlete. So.
Well, we're going to get into some of the most common hitting flaws, and like as I'm hearing some of this, I have like flashbacks to the way that I was maybe taught hitting at different times, and even the one about making sure that if I was punching somebody, it would literally be even with my belly button most of the time back in the day. So if you think about just what are some of the common hitting flaws that you hear or see, what would those be?
I think one, and a lot of them revolve around the absolutes, which is kind of interesting, the connection there, but one is an ineffective or lack of a load. Again, trying to go from 0 to 100 is extremely difficult. It causes issues in rhythm and timing, and so the load is an important piece, which is why it's also on absolutes. Dropping of the hands, we see athletes, it's this idea, and it makes sense, but it's this idea that the hands hold the bat. And so to get my bat to the ball, I have to take my hands down. And I think that's a very common flaw. Really, my hand should stay high. My hand should stay about chest height. My body tilt gets me to that pitch, and my legs get me to that pitch, not my hands. That will cause issues with the bat pass. So I think dropping of the hands is an extremely common one. And then over rotation and spinning. So again, this idea of like spinning the back leg versus driving that back leg. I kind of talked about that with the windmill concept and the helicopter concept. We don't want to fly with the chest immediately, and unfortunately, that's a common flaw. And it's really because one of the hardest teachings points in hitting, I think, is this idea of there is rotation in the swing, right? You're not going to swing and never rotate. However, it can't just be all rotation. So this happy medium of like, I have to rotate, but also I have to make sure that I stay in the zone. That's a very hard concept to understand. So it's not a surprise that over rotating and flying the chest is a common flaw that we see. And then finally, rolling the hands.
Yeah.
I think, and that's a lot of times that's due to lack of strength. It starts at a young age because kids are small. It's hard to handle the bat, and you have a ball coming in at you with speed. And so a lot of times that's just it's a strength issue. But we just see at contact, we see that rollover of the hands versus really staying palm up, palm down through the zone to get that Nike sign bat path. So those are my top 4.
Mm-hmm. So, and you talked about this even in your hitting sessions that you do also approach the mental side of the game, because obviously you're trying to prepare them to be in game and ready to go. So, what are the keys there to hitters' production in an actual game?
Well, I've got 5. I've got 5 here. So, mentality, preparation, approach, IQ, and adjustability. So I'll hit on those. Again, there's kind of 2 pieces to training. There's a technical piece, right, of cleaning up swing patterns. But then there's the competitive piece, which is you can have the cleanest swing ever and go on the game and not produce, right? And people be confused, right? Your swing looks really good, I don't understand. Or vice versa, you could have the ugliest looking swing and produce on the field, and people are confused, right? Why? How in the heck is that person hitting the ball? Their swing looks horrible. That person's hitting the ball because they have a great mindset, right? They have a great mindset, and they're just kind of go after it, right? So I think it takes both. It takes a clean swing patterns, but it also takes a competitor. And so when I think about mentality, if I don't step in the box with the right mentality, I've kind of lost before I've even gotten in the box, giving myself a chance. If I'm thinking negative things, if I'm saying negative things, I'm saying, I hope I don't do this, I hope I don't do this, I hope she doesn't throw this, really everything else is kind of tossed out the window, because you've cut yourself out of that at bat because your mentality isn't in it. And then I think the preparation side, of course that is what it is, right? It's making sure that you're putting in the work, that you're putting in the swings, and that's not just one day. I think we kind of make that mistake, right? We think that one lesson is the magic potion, and really it's not, right? The best kids that come train with me that see the most growth, they come to me for a session, and then they get extra work in on their own, whether that's at a practice or at their house or at a local field with mom and dad. And they get to reiterate what we did in training. And I always get the question, what should I work on at home? It's the most interesting question, because I'm work on what we just did, right? And sometimes that feels boring, but I think we have to, the great players do the boring really well, and they don't get bored with it. And I think they just go tackle it. And so it's do the same drills that we did in training and master those, because we're not going to master them in a 30 or 60-minute session. I'm going to introduce them. I'm going to educate you. I'm going to give you the resources. But then I think it's best utilized when athletes go and, okay, let's do those 4 drills again at home a couple of days before I see her. And then when I see them next, I can see growth.
Yeah.
If I see them the following week and I see the same hitter, we're not going to get very far very fast. And so I think that's, to really fast track development, it takes more than just one session with a trainer a week. It takes a continuous improvement and work on those same drills that you were doing before. So the preparation side is making sure that we're doing enough, getting enough swings in. And then I think approach is just what's our plan, right? And I think that changes obviously as you get older. It can be as simple as hey, I'm hunting strikes, yes, no. It could be as simple as, hey, this girl has a curveball and a screwball and whatever pitches, and I'm going to hunt this pitch. So it can be, as simple as, or as complicated, complex depending on the age. But I think making sure that you have a plan when you're up to bat, that you kind of know what the pitcher's throwing, you kind of have an idea of what the speed is and so forth, and not going up there just like, oh, I hope it goes well.
Right.
Making sure that you're kind of pre-thinking about what's the situation, what do I need to do, what's the pitcher doing. So I think that's important. And then IQ is just like, just really understanding the game, you know, having a knack for the game, really understanding, having knowledge, basic knowledge. And then adjustability is how can you adjust, right? Based on the information that you know, maybe from the opposing team, but also yourself, right? And we'll get into that in a second, but just like, you have to have you can't be a robot. You can't just like keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. So that's why I train the way I train, is asking questions, engaging them in conversation, not just giving them the answers, because I want them to be smart. I want them to know themselves so well that they know what went wrong, what went well, and how to adjust from there. So,
and as much as kids and parents probably want you to come out and be at every single game to help evaluate, how would you help athletes be able to evaluate themselves in game?
Well, I think I would use probably there's 3 questions, but there's a 4th question that's really non-physical related. And I think the first question, which is the non-physical related question, was I in the right mindset? That's the very first question. So if you're saying things like, I hope I don't do this, that's the first thing you have to fix, right? It doesn't matter how perfect your swing is. If you're telling yourself those negative things, it's not going to go well. And so I think that's the first question. The second question would be, was it a good pitch? So did you swing at a ball? Did you take a strike? If at any point in any of these 4 questions, if the answer is no, then stop and make that adjustment there. So if the answer is no, I didn't swing at a good pitch, it wasn't a good pitch, then that's my adjustment. My adjustment is to pick a better pitch the next time. Don't make it any more complicated than it needs to be. My third question, if it's yes, I had a good mindset, yes, I swung at a good pitch, then my third question is, was I on time, right? And I think a lot of times athletes will find that the problem occurs in one of those first 3, to be honest, is bad mentality, bad pitch selection, or bad timing. So really understanding, like, was I early, was I late, was I on time? Again, if the answer to that is I wasn't on time, then stop there. That's the adjustment. Figure out how to get on time. If the answer is, yeah, mindset was good, my pitch selection was good, my timing is good, what the heck's going on, right? That means if those 3 things are good, that means you really should be making contact. So at that point comes probably the most mechanical question of this evaluation series, which is, where did I miss? I think kids can kind of just like keep swinging. I see them in the cage, like they keep swinging, everything looks pretty good, it's a good pitch, they're on time for the most part. And the question I ask them is, hey, where are you missing? And one, I want them to understand that. So do they know? Yeah, I'm under. Okay, be aware of that. Once you say that kind of out loud, your body's going to make the adjustment. So a lot of times most kids miss under. That's where the dropping of the hands go. It causes me to miss under. So if I know that, my body can make that adjustment to stay a little bit more on top of the ball. But I have to know that. I can't just keep free swinging without asking that question in my head. So that's the most mechanical question. But too often we go there first. Yeah. We try to, stop doing this, stop doing it. We get very mechanical and it makes us a robot. When really the problem isn't necessarily, you might have some mechanics that you need to work on, but that's not the problem in the game. The problem is you were swinging at bad pitches or taking strikes, and you weren't on time, for example. And so I think those are the 4 questions I would ask. Those are very simple. You can answer them very quickly. Yeah. Even pitch to pitch, after the pitch, you can answer that question, right? You can go through that series very quickly, very simply. So that's the series I like my kids to ask themselves. I don't want them to get too mechanical, too robotic. I want them to say, was I in the right mindset? Was it a good pitch? Was I on time? And then lastly, where did I miss? And at any point, if the answer is no, then you stop there and you make that adjustment. So,
all right, unplanned question of the day.
I hate this.
You talked about the fact that you had to have both the mechanics and be a great mindset type of hitter ready to get the job done. Who is your favorite hitter to watch that you think has both?
Me. No, I'm just kidding. Gosh. I don't know.
Or maybe pick one or the other and talk about why you like to watch them.
I mean, I prefer the gamer. I think, and really, one of my teammates at Murray, where I played, she was a great example of this. I mean, her, and I've told her this before, but her swing is not necessarily the swing that I would show people if we're working on just mechanics and technique. But she was the OVC Player of the Year because she was a gamer. Like, it didn't look pretty necessarily. It wasn't, what you put on a wall per se, but I think she had belief, she had confidence, and she went out there and she had back-up ball skills and just got the job done, right? There was just a competitiveness to her, and so I think that wins out. If I'm picking one or the other, if I'm picking, a gamer or someone who's mechanically sound, I'm picking a gamer all day because they're going to be able to figure it out. They're going to be able to work through adversity. They're going to be able to come through in the clutch, right? If we're too mechanical, we freeze. We slow down, we freeze, we tense up. Everything's just slower. Reaction time slower, bat slower. So gamer is wins out, and I think that's what I would love to see more of in hitters. Is yes, let's clean the mechanics up, but I want to see people swing free. I want to see people, battle. I want to see, people choke up and figure out how to get a ball and play with 2 strikes. And I want to get rid of the strikeouts, and I want to figure out how to put pressure on the defense. And ultimately, I feel like gamers are going to get the job done more consistently.
So after watching this, if anybody wants to get started with you, how can they do that?
Oh, well, you can email me. This is probably the best option, alexa226sports.net. Or you can, check out our booking link and buy a package or sign up for a class. We have classes going on, and I do private lessons year-round. So,
all right. Well, thank you guys for joining us on this episode of the Raise Your Game podcast presented by 226 Sports.
Yeah, we about to lift off. Hey, been here too long. Y'all better wake up. Time for a new song.